Welcome to the Cozy Mystery Quartet. On behalf of Linda Hope Lee, Michael Erdahl, Susan McCormick, and I'm Wendy Kendall, let's talk. Alfred Hitchcock said, "A good story is life with the dull parts taken out." The same is true about good dialogue. In real life, people speak over each other. They say and They don't finish sentences, and they jump from topic to topic. Especially in a mystery, you want to get something potentially revealing as quick as possible. The irony is that in dialogue, a character tells information, but what they say is actually a true form of showing because it creates strong and vibrant emotions. Dialogue moves the story forward when it presents the reader with the process of change. Discovery and decision take place in the mind and are then expressed. A character begins with a certain desire, and on their journey, they talk about it. Dialogue reveals how they feel and what motivates them to act, their preferences, their attitudes, and it helps the reader understand the relationship between the characters who are speaking. Each character has their own goals that they want to achieve in a conversation, often different from each other. That creates tension and conflict, whether on the surface or below it. In this scene in Cat Out of the Bag, Ida, who prides herself on being a descendant of the Bayside founders, talks with Catherine at her purse museum. Ida walked over to stand right next to Catherine, and she said in a hoarse whisper, "I wouldn't say this to anyone else because I'm fond of Michael. He's a good worker, and I thought he was a good kid, but ever since that gala and the murder, he's been acting different." Catherine said, "He seemed the usual today." Ida motioned her hand to quiet Catherine. "You know he rents the third floor at my house. He's saving money for his own place. He snoops around about the police investigation all the time, asking me questions and talking about it with people who come into the Founders Historical Museum. It's interfering with his work. He's also spending a lot of time over here. Don't you find that strange? I wonder about my own safety with him in my house. I'm nervous. What do you think, Catherine?" Catherine didn't want to reveal that Michael was one of her own suspects. She found some of what Ida said interesting. Catherine remembered to whisper, "The one answer I can give you is that he's here more these days because he and Amber are dating." Ida said, "You know, I was thinking about what you said Sunday, that during the gala he had interrupted you and Brenda, saying that I wanted to see you. I never told him that, and I wasn't trying to find you. Was he trying to get her alone because he had some grudge against her?" That's the end of their conversation. When it comes to dialogue, remember, there's tension in what's spoken, and there's also tension in what's left unspoken.
An important aspect of dialogue is the speech pattern of each character. Most characters are going to sound different from each other, especially if they're from different parts of the world. An Irish mechanic will have a very, very different speech pattern than a Southern chef. To help establish what each character will sound like, I recommend developing a backstory. That backstory may never make itself known on the pages for the reader, but it will give you, as a writer, a consistency to the dialogue. For example, if you know the baker went to Cordon Bleu Culinary School in France, she might have a very haughty, snobby sentences when discussing pastries with her clients. She might be a minor character, and that bit of info may never make the book, but you will show the reader who she is through her words. An example from my book is Olivia, my main character's best friend. She is hyper and excitable and says things like, "Oh my God, I have a great idea." In contrast, Frederick Baronhof, a conservative, wealthy businessman, speaks in cultured, well-structured sentences. "This explains why I have bohemians at the entrance of my property. The police called and asked if I wanted them removed. I didn't see any need to manhandle them, so I declined." The proper development of your character's dialogue will make them come alive to the reader. Otherwise, they will seem two-dimensional and robotic. One topic that is commonly discussed among writers is how to handle accents. There are several schools of thought on the subject, but the only correct way is what works best for you. One method is to hit the accent early in the book and establish that they are from France, for example. Then back off for ease of writing and reading, but drop in the occasional merci or très bien to remind the reader who they are. The brain will fill in the accent if you handle the timing of your foreign word drops properly. Another option is to write out the accent through the whole novel. This can be laborious and can be tough for some readers who have to constantly interpret the switched words and mispronunciation an author spells out phonetically, but if it's done perfectly, it can have an authentic feel to many readers. One of my favorite characters I write is Roxy, the Canadian hostess who affects a southern accent since guests respond to it well. I'm constantly diving in and out of the southern accent, which adds to her charm and has made her one of the most talked about characters in my book. Linda, what are your thoughts on dialogue?
Dialogue in cozy serves the same purpose as in other fiction genres, including providing information, moving the story ahead, and characterizing the speaker. Here are 2 techniques for using dialogue specifically in cozies. 1. The sleuth overhears dialogue related to the mystery. Many amateur sleuths are blatant eavesdroppers, and my character, librarian Nina Foster, is no exception. In Murder Between the Pages, while attending a garden party, she observes tension between her 2 best friends, Zelma and Wildine. Later, while on a walk around the grounds, Nina encounters the 2. Rounding a sharp switchback, she heard Zelma say, "Wildine, you wouldn't dare." "Oh, wouldn't I?" Wildine replied. Nina ducked behind a large rhododendron bush. Pushing aside a handful of pink blossoms, she glimpsed Zelma and Wildine only a few yards away. Never mind she was spying and eavesdropping. This opportunity might be ideal to discover the trouble between them. "Can't we talk this over later?" Zelma asked. "Well, I'm stopping at my bookstore on my way home tonight. Be there at 11 if you want to catch me." Overhearing this dialogue becomes especially significant when on the following morning, Nina discovers Wildine's dead body at, you guessed it, her bookstore. Number 2. The sleuth probes for clues through dialogue. Here, instead of eavesdropping, the sleuth actively engages in conversation with another character. In Secrets to Die For, Nina invites Dorleen, a suspect in the mysterious drowning death of Ellie Larkin, to lunch. She casually works into the conversation topics that will point to either Dorleen's guilt or her innocence. "Where are we having lunch?" Dorleen asked. "At the Benson Hotel in downtown Seattle," Nina replied. "Have you eaten there?" Dorleen fingered the clasp on her purse. No, I've never been there." Nina knew differently, but she let the matter drop, for now. Later on during lunch, Nina steered the conversation in directions she hoped would lead Dorleen to admit she'd been to the Hotel Benson. Finally, she succeeded. Dorleen bit her lip. "Okay, I have been here, but Ellie wanted me to keep my visit a secret." More careful probing encourages Dorleen to reveal more. Even though at the end of lunch, Nina still has no proof of the woman's guilt or innocence, she has gained enough information, through dialogue, to consider the outing a success. Using these 2 techniques will not only move the story forward, but also will enliven the prose and make the characters come alive. Susan, tell us how you use dialogue in your cozies.
Thank you, Linda. I'm going to talk about dialogue tags. A dialogue tag, also called an attribution, lets the reader know who's speaking. Common dialogue tags are said and asked, and many people recommend sticking mainly to these 2 tags. Alternatively, more descriptive tags can be used, and a character can whisper, yell, remark, argue, shout, etc. These tags are more noticeable, and I personally am in the former camp. Here's a scene from The Fog Ladies' Family Matters, my new cozy which came out this week. Notice the new book cover on our site. In this scene, multiple ladies are conversing, and we need to distinguish who's talking. "Ladies, Sarah's right. I know this man's mother and his grandparents. They're as honorable as they come. There may be more to this than money and passion. And a dead-end job and a wife with a rising career," said Mrs. Carmichael. "Jealousy, a sin. said Mrs. Flynn. And the loss of manhood manifest by his wife's lack of respect and his unusual choice of exercise, said Mrs. Honeycutt. Vanity, a sin, said Mrs. Flynn. Ladies, please, said Mrs. Noonan. This is not just some man we're reading about in the newspaper. Sarah met him. She got a feeling about him. I know his family. I think we should offer our support. If nothing else, we can be a comfort to his mother. But there may be more to this than a desperate husband. Oh, I hope so, said Mrs. Carmichael gleefully. When do we get to meet the killer? As you can see, I went with the bland tag said because it fades into the woodwork and hopefully goes unnoticed. Even better, though, is to try to keep the tags to a minimum. If two people are talking, every line does not need its own attribution. Here's another scene. And their daughter's name was Julia, Sarah said. Yes, Julia. She and I spent summers volunteering at the juvenile offenders. If this is their daughter, then she's as proper and upstanding as her parents. She must be beside herself. Because her son's been accused of murder? Sarah asked. Or because he is a murderer? Mrs. Noonan lowered her voice, though no one else was present. What? I met him. I saw how he was with his boy and how much he loved his wife. He couldn't be a murderer. Murderers might not be murderers until something sets them off. Crimes of passion. In this section, the person speaking changed 6 times, but there are only 3 tags of dialogue. My next advice is don't overdo the adverbs. This is the first chapter of the first book of a famous book series, and I personally think the writing got better with each book. Here are examples of dialogue tags found in that first chapter. Said loudly, said sharply, said stiffly, chortled, muttered, sniffed angrily, said impatiently, said gently, said irritably, said coldly, said calmly, said heavily, said firmly, repeated faintly, said grudgingly, said finally. That's a lot of adverbs. Lastly, and most fun, a writer can do away with the tag and give an action instead. Here are 2 options. He did it, Mrs. Carmichael said, versus he did it. Mrs. Carmichael waved a chicken wing. Or, maybe take 2 breath mints, Edith Carmichael said. It's definitely your breath. Versus, maybe take 2 breath mints. Edith Carmichael shoved the whole tin closer. It's definitely your breath. Or, I tell you, it's just what it appears. Anger and jealousy. Believe me, I know, Enid Carmichael said. Versus, I tell you, it's just what it appears. Anger and jealousy. Believe me, I know. Enid Carmichael reached her hand toward the tub with Mrs. Honeycutt's favorite cream puffs, retrieving 4 miniature pastries in her large hand. She jammed them into her mouth and chewed thoughtfully. Dialogue is crucial to a story, and dialogue tags can get in the way of good writing or enhance our enjoyment of the story. Thank you for listening to this talk about dialogue. Join us next time to discuss tropes, cozy cliches even, things expected and demanded by the cozy reader. I'm Susan McCormick, and with Michael Erdahl, Linda Hope Lee, and Wendy Kendall, we form the Cozy Mystery Quartet. Please like and subscribe so you won't miss an episode.